Welcome to the new video on the MOPC Languages channel. This video will regard the Gothic language. What is exactly the Gothic language? We're used to associating the word Gothic with Gothic architecture, those old cathedral with those scary themes, and also the Gothic letters used for certain Central European, mostly German language. In printing press, Gothic is far more than that. Actually, Gothic architecture is a late medieval, modern style that was created after the Goths were gone. And the Gothic letters, which are known as Fakturschrift in German, are actually unrelated to the actual Gothic. The Gothic people were actually an Eastern Germanic tribe whose origins date back to late antiquity and whose homeland was probably somewhere along the eastern Baltic coast between Poland, Denmark, and Sweden. So the Gothic people were, over the course of antiquity and late antiquity, and in the context of the fall of the Roman Empire, became one of the main Germanic, so-called barbaric tribes to invade and occupy the power vacuum left by the fall of the Roman Empire. So the Goths invaded much. They first settled peacefully, partly in the Roman Empire, but then they invaded it, and they even sacked Rome. They even performed several acts of violence. They and their famous cousins, the Vandals. The Vandals were also an Eastern Germanic tribe. You can see here the evolutionary tree for the Germanic languages in general, a simplified tree. We see that there were also the Burgundian language, which is scarcely attested, and Vandalic is also very scarcely attested, but we can know from a few names and a few words registered here and there that those languages were most likely related to Gothic more closely than to the other Germanic languages. But all the Eastern Germanic languages have become extinct. They were languages that underwent massive migration, and over the course of time, their people, the speakers of the language, dissolved and were absorbed among the majority of speakers of the languages where they settled, mostly the Romance languages of Italy and southern France, as well as Spain and Portugal. You can see here the homeland of the Goths, somewhere around the Baltic coast. They were not Vikings, okay? They are not exactly, they probably had a very similar culture and they had a language similar to ancient Viking language, the Old Norse. We'll see a comparison later. The grammar of Gothic will be on this video. I'll show you a very thorough understanding of Gothic grammar and vocabulary in a few minutes. First, we'll take a look at history. So we assume that the Goths must have started somewhere there, and then they went all the way to Eastern Europe and settled along the Balkan area, just north of Greece. That's where a bishop called Ulfilas translated the Bible from Greek into Gothic and invented the Gothic alphabet, which we're going to see later. And over the course of a few centuries later, the Bible was translated into Gothic around the year 360 after Christ, of course. And the Goths came to take over most of the main areas of the Roman Empire. They migrated, as you can see on this map, from the Balkans area, the language areas of Romania and the Ukraine, and went into the Greek areas, and then migrated into Italy and southern France and Spain and Portugal over the course of half a century or so of migration during the late period of the Roman Empire, between 376 and 418 roughly. And they established the Ostrogoths. The Ostrogoth tribe established itself in mostly Italy and controlled Rome. They were became the owners of the most important part of the Roman Empire, Italy, the Italian peninsula itself. And the Visigoths conquered southern France, what is now the region of Provence. The capital city the capital city was Toulouse, the capital city of the Visigothic Empire, and most of Spain and Portugal fell under their rule as well during the late antiquity, early medieval times, around the year 450, 500. They actually absorbed even the Allan kingdom that existed in Spain and Portugal before the Goths overruled it. There was an Allan. The Allan people were an Iranian people, even much further from the east, much less European. They were like related to the Scythians, which were relatives of the Persians. But that's a long story. So the Visigoths established their kingdom in Western Europe. The word Ostrogoths was indeed a word meaning Eastern Gothic, but Visigoths was mistakenly assumed to mean Western Gothics, but the Visi people were just another tribe. Visi doesn't mean Western, okay? In Gothic. I thought that too, but it's not. I did research and it's not. As a result, there were many Gothic words incorporated into Romance language, mostly Portuguese. Portuguese, I believe, has the largest number of Gothic loanwords. Many important words such as agasalho, which means a warm clothes that you put on, comes from Gesellia, which is related to Geselle, Gesellschaft in German, means companion, being together. Ganso, which is the goose, word for goose. Luva, glove, a uniquely Portuguese word of Germanic language. And trégua, related to trigua, which is covenant, a truce, a peace agreement. The Gothic languages, besides the Ulfila Bible, that was translated in 360 after Christ, is known from a few runic inscriptions. There was also a runic, besides the Gothic alphabet, which was invented by Ulfila in 360. Before that, the Goths who lived in the Baltic, in Scandinavia, they adopted the runic script. And after that as well, a kind of a runic script that was also used for Nordic Scandinavian languages. Here we see a few darts, arrow heads inscripted in runic Gothic. The Goths, as I said, became assimilated by their conquered people, but by their subjects. They became linguistically assimilated, and the Gothic language withered away along medieval times, except for Crimea. Yes, the little peninsula that is so much trouble to the world nowadays, with the Russian invasion in Ukraine and so on. Crimea, which has always been a focal point of a lot of trouble, preserved the so-called Crimean Goths. The Crimean Gothic language was attested as late as the 1700s, as late as 1750, 1780. There must have been speakers. Some people say that all the way to the 1800s, there were still people using Gothic in small villages, at least inside their homes, as a family language spoken by some older people in the countryside of Crimea, as late as the 1840s, 1850s, but there's no evidence. We have evidence of Gothic existing roughly until the 1700s, 1760, 1780 maybe. The last big register of Gothic, Crimean Gothic, was made in the 1500s when there was a traveler in Crimea who went after the Goths there. He heard about the Goths still existing in Crimea. He went there. At that time, I believe that the Goths were, Crimea was a part of the Ottoman Empire. The Goths actually converted to Islam. So many of the Goths actually were incorporated into the Crimean Tatars, who were a Turkic tribe. So most Goths actually became Tatars, spoke the Tatar language, learned the Tatar language, and migrated to Tatarstan in Russia, and also in the Crimeans who migrated, Crimean Gothics who migrated to, as Tatars, they migrated to Turkey. So most Tatars are actually now in Turkey. Many of these Tatars are descended from the Gothic peoples. And here in Brazil, I even received some mail from some German descended Brazilian who claimed that his grandfather was a Crimean German, because the Germans migrated there much later during the 1700s, 1800s. There was a big German migration to the Ukraine and to Crimea. But some people in Brazil claim to be of of having had ancestors who spoke Gothic. I think that's not true. I think they were just Crimean Germans who came later, completely unrelated to Gothics, very different thing, but maybe the possibility of people having spoken Gothic here in Brazil is truly, it's a possibility, it's not entirely impossible. Given that Gothic may have survived well into the 1800s, which is when the Germans migrated to Brazil. As a source for grammar, I used the Wilhelm Braune Gothic grammar translation into English, the English translation of the Wilhelm Braune grammar, which is probably the biggest source on Gothic till today. We also have this William Bennett Gothic introduction to the Gothic language. Not so great, but it's good given that there are so few sources on Gothic. And this is the Gothic alphabet. The Gothic alphabet invented by Ulfila around the year 360 to translate the Bible into Gothic. And this Bible, this Gothic Bible, was used by the Goths of Italy and Spain and France and Portugal throughout the Middle Ages. So the Gothic language is something that is integrated into Western European languages, even for people who have Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese ancestry, and the cultures derived from these peoples. They were partly born from that culture. It's not something alien to us Western Europeans. For me, I'm Brazilian of Portuguese ancestry. Brazil itself is of Portuguese ancestry. So this is part of our history as well. This was part of Portugal's history, of Spanish history. And this affected our languages, as I've shown in the loanwords a lot. So this is a Gothic alphabet largely derived from the Greek alphabet. As I said, the translation of the Bible was effected in the Balkans, north of Greece, very far from Western Europe. But this Gothic Bible was translated, was taken with the Goths. Copies of the Bible were taken with the Goths as they conquered Western Europe in early medieval times. Over time, the Goths had converted to a non-Catholic form of Christianity. I think it was Arianism. And Arianism was declared a heresy and persecuted by Catholics very heavily. So maybe the destruction of Gothic literature had to do with the persecution of Arian, there is non-Catholic Christians in early medieval times. The Arians believed that Jesus wasn't exactly the same as a God. They had a different Trinity. The Trinity concept didn't exist like Catholics and Protestants believe and Orthodox believe. But that's a whole nother discussion. Let's move on to the language itself. Phonetically, Gothic is a little bit surprising because it doesn't have those very Germanic frontal rounded vowels like and U. Those are not native languages, native sounds in Gothic. So we have short and long vowels, of course. E, and E. The diphthong AI is also pronounced like E, but long. The sound E can be written EI to mean a long E. And O can be spelled an O or AU with an accent on the U. It means it's a single sound. And when the diphthong is written with the accent on the first letter, it means that it's actually a diphthong accented on the first letter. So if you put the acute accent on the AU means owl. If you put the accent on the U, it means O. The same thing goes for AI. When AI is accent on the A is pronounced distinctly from the I, you have I. When the accent is placed on the I, so we have E. We have a single sound. Certain consonants were spelled a little bit differently. They used the letter equivalent to Q without a W or a U later to indicate the qua, qui, quo sound. And there's also this strange letter that was adapted even by the transliterators, the books that explain Gothic. They used this strange variation of the letter H with sort of a integrated U to translate the Gothic letter that made hua, huo, hui, hue, like an HW sound. But of course, I'm going to use just an H and U because it's just the same. But there's also the thorn letter that is like Old English, like modern Icelandic, representing the th sound. As far as I know, there was no separate letter for the sound. But it did exist, so certain letters, when put between vowels, did sound like fricatives. There was a lenition, intervocalic lenition. There's lenition is when a consonant becomes weaker, when it becomes more sonorous, more voiced, when it appears between vowels. So haben, the verb to have, is haben, van, like a bilabial, not fully closing the lip, haben. Fadar. So you do have the sound, but it was automatically a product of D appearing between vowels. And sachen also would have a throaty sound, fricative instead of sachen. Greek, Gothic also used the convention of Greek of writing the ung, the nasal velar sound, as double G. Just like modern Greek or ancient Greek, instead of writing NG or NK, you'd have just double G or GK to make finger. So finger was spelled with two G's, and the two G's indicated NG. Fingers, singwan, drinken, the verb to drink. Fingers, of course, is finger. Sigwan, drinken is, of course, to drink. And sinkwan as well, which is to sink. That's phonetics. Let's go to the pronouns. Here we see the Gothic pronouns. One thing that stands out, Gothic had not only singular and plural, but even in the pronouns, it had a dual number. A dual number means a plural of only two. So ik means I, and wit means the two of us. And vis means us, means we, more, three or more of us. The same for you. There's thu, which means thou, you in the singular. There is yut, which is not attested, that's why it has an asterisk there. It's not directly attested, but it's inferred to have been yut, meaning the two of you. And yus means you, the three or more of you. The same goes for all pronouns. You've noticed that the oblique forms of the dual pronouns, unkis, inkis, are very similar. Unkara, which is also the genitive, they are very similar to the Icelandic pronouns, the plural pronouns in Icelandic. So they are very much like the Old Norse pronouns, except that in Icelandic they have been adapted to a full plural use. They are no longer dualed. Icelandic does not distinguish dual from plural, but Icelandic did take the dual forms to form their plural pronouns today. Take a look at Icelandic pronouns, you're going to see that. You're going to see a lot of Germanic videos here on the channel, so stay tuned. And don't hesitate in contacting me to learn languages online. I teach German, I teach English, I teach Latin languages, I teach Slavic languages as well. Latin itself, ancient Greek, modern Greek. Get in touch with me on my email if you want to learn languages online directly with me. The conditions will be given by email. Some indefinite pronouns. There's sum, which is very like English, some. Ni huashun, nobody. Ni manahun, nobody. Or huazun, which means every or everybody. A funny thing about Gothic vocabulary, before we move any further, is that gistardagis, which is obviously the cousin of yesterday in English, or gestern in German, or gisteren in Dutch, means actually tomorrow in Gothic, although I think that it only occurs once in the body of literature that we have available for Gothic. So it may have meant something like both tomorrow and yesterday. There are a few languages that conflate the two concepts, like modern Indian languages, where kal in Hindi means tomorrow and yesterday, and it's the tense of the verb, the time indicated by the verb, by the sentence that'll give you the specific of it, whether it's talking about tomorrow or yesterday. Gothic did have a separate specific word for tomorrow, du morgena. So we don't know exactly. Maybe gistardagis was just tomorrow and yesterday, the adjacent day, the neighboring day. And himadag was today. Himadaga was today. Moving on to the numbers. Extremely interesting. You see that. Eins, zwei, drei, threes. The number 4 is very interesting because it preserves a D that's been lost in all other Germanic languages. We only have like Feor in ancient English. There's Fear in German. Führer in Swedish. So no other Germanic language preserved this D, which is an Indo European leftover from the quatuor, which was the Proto-Indo European form. We can see that in Latin and many languages, and in Germanic only Gothic preserved it. And fünf, sechs, sieben, achten, neun, tehun, einlif, 12, thristehun, fidortehun, etc. Until 20, which is tueticus. Then the tens will be produced like 20 until 60, and then from 70 to 90 there was another paradigm. Here the verb to be, wisan, in Gothic. Very much like Old Saxon, very similar to Old Saxon. I think that it's closer to Old Saxon than to any other Old Germanic languages, but it does preserve the distinction in the plural words. The Old Saxon, the Anglo-Saxon forms had only one form for all plural persons. In Gothic, we still see the three-way distinction between first, second, and third person plurals as well. Gothic had a present and a past, and also a subjunctive present and a subjunctive past. It didn't have composite tenses like modern Germanic languages had, like using the verb to have been, or will be. These compounds still didn't exist. They were formed only in medieval times in the other Germanic languages. Here's a big smorgasbord of all the verbs to be in all the old Germanic languages that are known today. Gothic, Old High German, which is also a form of essentially the Frankish language, or Anglo-Saxon, the Old Saxon, which is a language of northern Germany originally, and Old Norse, the language of the Vikings. So you can see that Gothic is a little bit close to Old Norse than to Saxon, but it's not far off. Saxon was a mixture, had a big mixture of forms. And if you want to just take a look at it closely and do a print screen, because it's a lot of information there. Other verbs, other auxiliary verbs, there was kunen, which is like the meaning of to know, but it's related to kennen, or maybe to können, which means to know in the sense of cognition, or können, which is the verb can in German. The present is like kann, kannt, kann in the third person, and kunum in the first person plural. Just like Old German and Old English, the second person wasn't st yet, it's still t. Old German was like that as well. The modern kannst form, which also entered English somehow, kannst, was not present in Old Germanic languages. And the past kuntha, the past participle kunts. Magen is the verb may, which also meant can, okay, because the verb kunen was not can, the verb kunen was like knowing. To express ability, you used magen in Gothic. There is the verb witan, which is another verb to know, but in the sense of knowing, in the sense of saber, or znat, which is the wissen form. Very similar to German, Weit, vet, weist, vet, vitum, vituth, vitun. Visa, vises, visa, visedum, etc. in the past. There was also an obscure form, less, meaning I know, only found once in the Bible. There's only this form, less, it is I know. It may be related to the word to the verb learn in Germanic. We don't know exactly. There are no other forms left in the literature. There's also this mannen, to think, related to meaning in English, but not surviving as an auxiliary verb, as a modal verb elsewhere in Germanic. Schoolen, which is a verb shall. William was extremely interesting in Gothic because it didn't exist in the present anymore. It only existed, its present meaning was supplemented by its subjunctive form. So the only form that existed is this Viliau, Viles, Vili, Vilima, Vilith, Vilina. That meant I want. In I want, you want. In Gothic, so you had to put it in the subjunctive. The other forms didn't exist as far as we know. And the verb to have, haben, hava, haves, haveth, haben, haveth, and so on, was a regular verb in the present, habeda, habedes. Here we take the Gothic verb nehmen, related to the word in German nehmen, to take. In the present past, there was also a passive form that also had a passive. I only put the present passive. The past passive didn't fit the screen there. So Gothic is the only Germanic language to preserve a separate passive conjugation, much like what we saw in Latin and what we still see in Greek. There was a separate passive form created by separate suffixes. Very interesting, very archaic feature of Gothic. You can see that the past is formed by vowel change. That was actually the regular way of forming past tenses in Germanic was what we now call irregular verbs, but they were regular. These vowel changes were regular changes that were observed by verbs of all sorts, or most verbs. So nima, num. In the past, you see that there are two possible vowels, one for the singular and one for the plural. That paradigm is preserved throughout the Gothic paradigm. Here, a comparison between the verb nehmen and its German counterpart nehmen. For you to take a look. If you don't know German, I put it there for your convenience. Take a good look and see how similar Gothic, spoken 16 centuries ago, still is quite similar to modern German. Here's a few derivatives of the verb nehmen. The verb nehmen, just like any verbs in Germanic, just like modern Germanic languages, they can get a lot of prefixes. They can receive prefixes to make new verbs with slightly different meaning. And I put there the German equivalent, even though it doesn't actually necessarily mean the same. I put the equivalent prefix by etymology. So I have annehmen, atnehmen, afnehmen. The difference from German is that these prefixes were not separable. In German, when you take a verb like abnehmen and conjugate it in the present, you say ich nehme ab. But in Gothic, you say ich afnehme. Ich afnehme. You don't take away the prefix. There are no separable prefixes in Gothic. This is the category of vowel shifting verbs. We just saw nehmen. There is also greipa, greip, gripen, gripens, which is to grab. Lehua, lehu, lehu, lehuans, to loan. Other verbs of the category, digan, to need. A dough, just like related to the word dough itself, degen, teig in German. Steigen means steigen. Getehen, maybe zeigen. Bieten, maybe biten. Bieden, wait. I don't know what German word that's related to. Thiehen, to prosper, it's probably gedeihen, thehen. Snethen, schneiden. Dreben, treiben, drive. Beleben, bleiben. Skenen, scheinen. Another class that has a slightly different vowel shift is the class of Buden, Bauth, Buden, Both, Budum, Budens. Other verbs, stuhen, which is the verb ziehen in German, suchen, to be sick, no German equivalent there. Maybe Seuche, which is a noun meaning epidemic. Guten, which is gießen in German. Newton, which is genießen. Drusen, which meant to fall. It's actually related to drowsing in English, but no German equivalent. Kusen also has no German equivalent, but does have a Dutch equivalent. Kiezen, to choose, also related to French choisir, which is a Germanic loan into French that French took from Frankish, not from Gothic. Binda, bund, bundum, bundus, a very typically Germanic paradigm. Brienen, to burn. Duginen, interesting enough, is to begin. They didn't have the prefix be in Gothic, so they had the du. Duginen. Du is equivalent to the zu of German. Aflinen, to depart. Rinen, winen, finten. Sinquen, to sink. Drinken, to drink. Blingen, to beat. Gilden, to be worth. Related to yield in English. Yield is the relative of gelten in German. Zwilten, to die. I don't know what that's related to in other languages. Hilpen, to help. Bergen, to hide. Related to burrow in English also. Werthen, to become, like the werden in German. Zwerben, to wipe, probably related to swerving in English. And werben, to walk. Other categories exist. You have here mit, mat, metum, mittens, to measure, which is the German messen, misst, maß, gemessen. Giba, gaf, gebung, gittens. Quimen, the verb to come. Funnily enough, had a W there. Quimen, not kiemen, quimen. That's why in Dutch you have a kwam in the past, right? Liegen, to lie, in the sense of being in a horizontal position. Wrieken, to persecute. Gawigen, to move. This prefix ga in Gothic is speculated to having added the sense of a perfective verb, a perfective aspect verb. So that means a specific event that is completed and not prolonged, not repeated. So the past participle in Gothic did not receive the ga prefix like German. German and Dutch received the ge prefix in the past participle. Gothic verbs don't. Just like Old Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian languages, they don't have that. Sehun, liefen, fragnen, eaten actually occurs as freten, which is why you have essen and fressen in German. Fressen is veressen. Is fra plus eaten. We see that compound, the logic behind that compound can be clearly seen in Gothic. Fressen in German means like for an animal to eat, and essen is for a person to eat. Quithen, to say. Slagen is a verb to slay. Schlagen, meaning to beat. Sacken, to quarrel, related to Sache, to sake in English. Waken, to wake. Dragen, thwagen, maybe related to Swedish tvätta, which is to wash. Okay, I don't know any other relative. Malen, to grind. Skaben, to shave. Alen, to grow, maybe related to alere in Latin, which is meant to feed. Wachsen, to grow, related to waxing, like waxing moon, and wachsen in German. Fahren, to fare, fahren. Frathian, to understand, I don't know what that's related to. Lachen, to laugh. Here another verb, the verb halden, related to hold, the verb to hold in Gothic, belongs to another kind of Gothic verb, the reduplicating verb. The reduplicating verb repeated the first syllable as a prefix to create the past of the verb, which is in Indo European must have been the perfect aspect form. So here halda makes the past hehalda. Okay, we have that feature very clearly still in ancient Greek, in Sanskrit. There's a number of maybe 30, 35 Latin verbs that had reduplication. Reduplication was indeed a very Indo European way of forming the perfective aspect of verbs. Gothic verbs, there may be a few dozen verbs that follow the paradigm in Gothic, and we can see how that worked right there. Halda, I hold. Hehald, I held. Haldith, he holds. Hehald, he held. And other verbs that follow that paradigm, duplicated: fauthen, stauden, fahen, hahen, slepen, heten. Leken, meten, skeden, hopen, auka. In auka, the reduplicated form, here we have a vowel in the beginning. Auka doesn't begin with a consonant, so the reduplicated syllable is only eok. Oka, eok. That's probably related to Swedish öka, to increase. In Latin, in Greek, in ancient Greek, this verb also had a reduplication, but because it started with a vowel, it actually just lengthened the vowel and shifted it a little bit to the front. So in Greek, auxano, which is to increase, made its perfect euxeka, euxeka. Here we have a so-called weak verb. The weak verbs didn't change their vowels. They only added a dental suffix with a D there. Just like modern English verbs, the regular verbs, they have the ed of the modern weak German verb to have the te in the end. Gothic already had that category. That suffix with the d there is assumed to have been a form of the verb to do, that in very ancient times, already in Proto-Germanic, must have been a productive way to make new words into verbs by conjugating them with the verb to do after the root. Like they did work, they worked. So lagya, I lay, lagida, I laid. Other weak verbs: walyan, getamian, uftanian, warian, uswakian, satyan, wasyan. Hulian, toyan, that's the verb to do. Stroyan, quian, ananian, melian, chrenian, branian. Okay, these verbs with a J in the end before the A, these J forms are usually causatives in Germanic. So causatives were like to make something do. So we saw brinan before, remember? Brinan is to burn in a sense. I imagine that the books don't say it, but I imagine that the brinan verb was the intransitive, like something is burning, the house is burning, the forest is burning. And branian must be the causative, to make something burn. The people are burning the house. The men are burning down the forest. That's the transitive version. Namnyan, wanjan, dranchang. That's why you have like to drench in English. To drench is a survival of this causative. To drench is to make something drink. Just like English, tränken, which means to drown. That came from the old causative of Germanic. That in Gothic we still see it clearly. Hellion, to heal. Technion, which is Zeichen, related to token in English. And Fortien, which is to fear, fürchten. Here the Gothic declension, the noun. In Gothic there were only 4 cases: nominative, accusative, genitive, and dative. There was a leftover instrumental only for the interrogative, the question word, the interrogative pronoun. But other than that, there was no instrumental anymore. The old instrumental and the old locative of Indo European merged it all with the dative. So the dative was actually dative instrumental locative case, just like German and Icelandic still are. The Gothic declension is very similar to Old Anglo-Saxon. There was in the masculine there was an S in the definite article for the masculine singular nominative, just like Old English was. That's very weird compared to modern Germanic languages, where all definite articles start with a dental sound, not a sibilant. Here's another declension, which is more consonantal, even though consonantal stems actually didn't exist anymore in Germanic. Even in Gothic, this is actually a U-type declension, related maybe to the fourth declension in Latin. Only a few words were like that. They were rare in Gothic. And here's the consonantal declension of Gothic. The only kind of consonantal declension left was the N declension. So we have namo, which is neutral, plural nomina. Just like in Latin, we had nomen, nomina. And herto meant a heart. Hertona, hearts. Here's the question words. Hua, huo, huas. Hua was actually the neutral form of huo and huas that were the feminine and masculine form of the same pronoun. The interrogative adverbs were huaris, which, huar, where. Huath or huadra meant whither, to where. And huadro meant from where, whence. Juan was when, and hue, huewa was how. Hue was also the instrumental of the question word that I told you about. As you can see down there, there's the declension of the question of the interrogative pronoun below. Adjectives in Gothic had a comparative form. Some of them were irregular forms. Mikils, big, related to the Scandinavian mykke, which means much. Had mesa and mests, bigger and biggest. Littles, little, small. Miniza, minists. Goths, good, had batiza and batists, which was better, best. Ubils, versisa, and the superlative is unknown. Synax is very interesting because it had the same fake ending, the same droppable ending that Latin had. This word in Latin was senex. But in the comparative, the X disappeared and only the root sin remained and received the ending. Senex and senior meant older in Latin, and senissimus meant oldest. We don't have the comparative in Gothic, but the superlative is sinista, not senegista. So that the same thing happened in Gothic. And here a little bit of Gothic vocabulary, a few nouns taken from various sources to compare its vocabulary to other Germanic languages. Borg, borgs, milux is very interesting, milk. There was a vowel between the L and the K there, milux. Alhs, temple, I don't know what that's from. Werts, thing, that's also weird. Nachts, night. Guma, man, that's very different. Menats, month. Frions, friend. Thousands, teacher. Fravitans, avenger. Dulths, a feast. Harto, a heart. Theuda, people. Triu, a tree. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little introduction to the Gothic language. I think there is no other comparable video on the internet or even written source that matches what I've been able to compile here. If you liked the video, please consider contributing to the channel. The links are below the video. And of course, leave your like, share the video, activate the notification bell, subscribe, obviously. Leave your comment in the comment section because I have to know what you are thinking or what else you'd like to have on the channel. And other than that, contact me if you want to learn a language directly with me on the internet. I teach using video conference systems. Directly, you can learn from your home. My contact email is on this video and also below in the description. Other than that, we see each other on the next video.